He said she deserved better. A simple plumber offering comfort. But her quiet reply, "Then be it," and the unexpected touch ignited a forbidden connection. The clanging of tools against the porcelain sink was the only sound breaking the afternoon stillness in the kitchen on Peregrine Close, a quiet, tree-lined street nestled in a historic district of New Haven. Arjun Prasad, a young man of 23, felt the familiar ache in his lower back as he twisted himself into a knot beneath the antiquated basin. His uncle, a seasoned veteran of reliable repairs of New Haven, had sent him to deal with what was described as a minor, persistent leak. But nothing about this house, or its occupant, Mrs. Izolda Volkova, felt minor. The air itself seemed to hum with a quiet, almost melancholic energy, a stark contrast to the usual boisterous homes he frequented. He usually worked quickly, efficiently, eager to move on to the next job. But here, time seemed to stretch, thin and shimmering. Izolda appeared in the archway separating the kitchen from a sun-drenched conservatory, her silhouette framed by the late afternoon light. She moved with an unhurried grace, a quiet dignity that was almost startling. Her hair, the color of burnished copper, was swept into a loose chignon, a few rebellious tendrils framing a face that, while clearly mature, possessed a timeless beauty. There were faint lines around her eyes, subtle etchings of a life lived, and in their hazel depths Arjun detected a profound, almost hidden sadness. She wore a simple charcoal gray linen dress that draped elegantly, hinting at the slender curves beneath. Her presence, even from a distance, was palpable, a silent current in the air that made Arjun acutely aware of his own disheveled appearance. The grease smears on his forearm, the faint sweat stain blooming on the back of his faded work shirt. "Is everything proving difficult, Mr. Prasad?" Her voice was a low contralto, smooth as polished river stones, carrying a slight, almost imperceptible lilt that suggested origins beyond New England. It rippled through the quiet kitchen, sending a curious tremor through him. He fumbled with the wrench, nearly dropping it. "Just a bit stubborn, Mrs. Volkova," he mumbled, his voice rougher than he liked. "Looks like the original installation from the early 70s. Solid stuff, but parts can wear down over time." He finally managed to crack the corroded nut, the metallic groan a sharp protest in the hushed room. A final, stubborn drip of water splattered onto the absorbent cloth he'd laid down. He could feel her eyes on him, a steady, analytical gaze that wasn't intrusive, but deeply attentive. It was the kind of look that made him feel seen, in a way he wasn't accustomed to. He usually blended into the background, the silent repairman. With her, it was different. He heard the soft rustle of her dress as she moved towards the antique pantry, the delicate clink of porcelain as she retrieved a teacup, the scent of faint, sweet spices, possibly cinnamon and dried oranges, mingled with the older, richer aroma of aged paper, creating an intoxicating perfume that hung subtly in the air around her. "Would you care for some water, or perhaps a cup of tea, Mr. Prasad?" she offered, her voice closer now. He sensed her standing just behind him, the subtle shift in air current around her. He pushed himself up slowly, his knees cracking a little, and turned. She was holding a steaming mug, its warmth diffusing into the quiet kitchen. Their eyes met, and in that brief, suspended moment he felt a strange, almost electric jolt. Her eyes were a complex tapestry of greens and golds, reflecting the diffused light. And in their depths he saw a depth of emotion, a quiet intensity that was both intriguing and a little unsettling. His own gaze, he knew, was probably wide, perhaps a little too eager, like a startled deer caught in an unexpected clearing. "Water would be perfect. Thank you, Mrs. Volkova," he managed, trying to inject a professional calm into his voice, a composure he didn't quite feel. He wiped his oil-stained hands on a rag, suddenly acutely self-conscious of the grime beneath his fingernails. She handed him a tall, chilled glass of water, condensation beading on its surface. As their fingers brushed, the contact was fleeting, barely there, yet it left a surprising warmth on his skin. She withdrew her hand almost immediately, a subtle, practiced movement, He drank deeply, the cold water a welcome shock to his system, giving him a moment to collect himself. "So, what was the source of the plumbing's rebellion?" she asked, her lips curving into a faint, almost imperceptible smile as she gestured towards the sink with her teacup. He cleared his throat, holding up the culprit, a small, brittle rubber washer, cracked and discolored with age. "Just an old washer, ma'am, hardened over time. It's a common issue with these older fixtures. I'll swap this out for a new one, reseal the connection, and you'll be good to go. Probably for another 20 years, if you keep the pressure balanced." He found himself explaining the mechanics in more detail than necessary, delving into the intricacies of water pressure and mineral deposits, trying to fill the quiet, almost pregnant silence that seemed to gather between them. He felt a strange compulsion to impress her, to prove he was more than just a grunt worker. He knelt again, retrieving a fresh, supple washer from his well-organized toolkit. The process of reassembling the pipes, once a rote task, now felt like a delicate operation performed under a microscope. He was acutely aware of her continued presence, the quiet rustle of her clothes, the faint, comforting aroma she carried. "My father, he was something of a handyman himself," she murmured, her voice a distant echo, as he meticulously tightened the final connection. "He used to say that every house, every object within it, had its own spirit, and when something broke, it was merely its way of crying out for attention, for renewal." Arjun paused, his wrench hovering over the pipe. He looked up at her, really looked at her. Her gaze was distant now, focused on something unseen, a ghost in the sunlit air. "He sounds like a thoughtful man." "He was," she said, her voice softening further, a wistful quality entering her tone. "And he was quite good at listening to those cries." A faint, melancholic smile touched her lips, a brief, almost painful revelation of something lost. The quiet sorrow he'd noticed earlier deepened, a shadow passing over her features. He tested the faucet, first a hesitant drip, then a steady, strong stream of clear water. No leaks. He ran his hand along the newly tightened pipe, feeling for any nascent moisture. Nothing. "There you go, Mrs. Volkov. All done." He began to pack his tools, the metallic clinks sounding louder than usual in the tranquil kitchen. He stood up, turning to face her. She was still by the counter, cradling her teacup, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that made his cheeks warm. "Thank you, Mr. Prasad," she said, her voice imbued with a quiet sincerity. "You've been remarkably thorough. And quite illuminating." "Just doing my job, ma'am," he replied, a little too quickly, a little too stiffly. He felt an inexplicable reluctance to leave, a strange tether pulling him to the quiet elegance of her home, to the quiet woman who inhabited it. It was irrational, he knew. His schedule beckoned, but the pull was undeniable. She moved towards a small, ornate writing desk tucked into a sunlit alcove, her movements fluid and unhurried. As she opened a drawer and retrieved a small, leather-bound checkbook, her posture was impeccable, every gesture economical and graceful. Arjun watched her, noticing the way the sunlight caught the faint, silver threads woven into the rich mahogany of her hair, glimmering like tiny, unspoken histories. She tore off the check and held it out to him. As his fingers brushed hers, the contact was more substantial this time, a lingering warmth that settled deep in his palm. He glanced down at the check. The amount was surprisingly generous, significantly more than his uncle's standard rate for a simple washer replacement. "This is more than the estimate, Mrs. Volkov," he said, looking up at her, a faint frown creasing his brow. A genuine smile, less guarded than before, touched her lips. Her hazel eyes, usually so shadowed, seemed to lighten, a spark of amusement dancing within them. "Consider it a gratuity for your patience, Mr. Prasad, and for that captivating lecture on the secret lives of plumbing fixtures. And for saving me from further unseen catastrophes." Her eyes twinkled briefly, a fleeting lightness in their depths, a hint of playful wit he hadn't expected. He found himself smiling back, a genuine, unforced smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "You're very welcome." He gathered his toolkit, the weight of it familiar and grounding. He turned towards the front door, the finality of departure a dull ache in his chest. He took a step, then another, the rich, subtle scent of cinnamon and old paper already fading from his senses. Do you often find yourself fixing the souls of inanimate objects, Mr. Prasad?" she asked, her voice soft as he reached the threshold, his hand on the cool brass of the doorknob. He paused, turning back. The setting sun cast long shadows, bathing the hallway in a warm, golden light that softened her features. "Yes, ma'am. My uncle's business. Reliable repairs. Covers everything from leaky faucets to major installations. I'm still learning, but I'm getting there." "And do you enjoy this journey of discovery?" she inquired, her head tilted slightly, her gaze curious, probing. "Most days I do," he admitted, shrugging, a faint flush spreading across his cheeks. "It's honest work, and there's a certain satisfaction in taking something broken and making it whole again, bringing things back to life, so to speak." He thought of her father, of silent guardians. He wondered if she saw him as one. "Indeed," she murmured, a soft sigh escaping her lips, a sound of profound agreement. "There is." She walked towards him, stopping a respectful but undeniable distance away. "Well, thank you again, Arjun." She used his first name again, a small, intimate shift that caught him off guard, a subtle lowering of the invisible barrier between them. "I truly appreciate your dedication." "Any time, Mrs. Volkov," he replied, his voice a little husky, a little rough around the edges. He wanted to say more, to articulate the strange, compelling draw he felt towards her, towards this quiet house, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. He merely offered a slight nod, a small, almost deferential bow of his head, and then he was out the door, the click of the lock echoing the sudden emptiness he felt. He stood on the porch, the fading sunlight warm on his face, the quiet hum of the neighborhood wrapping around him. He felt an inexplicable lightness, a strange, undeniable sense that something had irrevocably shifted, even if he couldn't articulate its full meaning. You won't believe who took his side. This is just the start. It gets stronger. The call came 2 weeks later, an insistent buzz from his phone vibrating against his hip as he wrestled with a particularly stubborn drain at the Copper Kettle, a bustling diner on Sterling Street. The aroma of stale coffee and sizzling bacon usually provided a comforting backdrop to his work, but today it felt distant, muted by the sudden jolt of recognition when he saw the caller ID. "Uncle Ben." "Arjun, change of plans." His uncle's gruff voice boomed through the receiver, cutting through the diner's chaotic symphony. "That Volkov lady on Peregrine Close? Her water heater just completely gave out. Sounds like she's in a bit of a panic. I need you to drop everything and get over there. It's an emergency, no hot water for her, and it's a cool night already." A strange mixture of apprehension and an undeniable surge of anticipation shot through Arjun. Izolda. He felt a peculiar tightening in his chest. "The water heater, Uncle? Isn't that usually a 2-person job for a full replacement? A whole unit?" "It is, generally," his uncle conceded, his voice tinged with regret. "But I'm stuck battling a beast of a commercial furnace on Elmwood Avenue, and literally every other hand is tied up with emergencies. Just go assess it, tell her what's what. Maybe try a temporary patch if it's feasible. The crew will be there first thing tomorrow morning to install a brand new unit. Just be there for her, okay, son?" She sounded genuinely distraught. "Understood, Uncle," Arjun responded, his voice losing its usual relaxed cadence, replaced by a sudden, focused gravity. He quickly apologized to the diner owner, promising to return first thing in the morning to finish the clogged drain, and was soon pulling his old, familiar work van out onto the street. the engine's familiar rumble a comforting rhythm beneath the rising tide of his thoughts. When he pulled up to Peregrine Close, the streetlights were beginning to cast a soft, amber glow, painting long, purple shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns. The windows of Izolda's townhouse glowed with a warm, inviting light, a stark beacon against the encroaching dusk. He cut the engine, the sudden silence of the quiet street amplifying the rapid beat of his own heart. He walked up the stone path, his work boots surprisingly loud on the smooth flagstones, and knocked, the sound echoing a little too loudly in the quiet evening air. Izolda opened the door almost immediately, as if she had been waiting just behind it. The sight of her struck him anew. She was no longer dressed in the elegant linen he remembered. Tonight she was wrapped in a thick, cable-knit cardigan, its soft wool pulled tightly around her, and her usually impeccably styled hair was a little disheveled, as if she'd run her hands through it in frustration. But it was her face that truly arrested him. Usually so composed, so carefully guarded, it was now etched with genuine distress. Her eyes, those deep hazel pools, were shadowed with fatigue, rimmed with a faint redness that suggested recent tears. "Mr. Prasad," she breathed, her voice a fragile whisper, a wave of profound relief washing over her features, momentarily softening the edges of her worry. "Oh, thank goodness. Your uncle called. He said you might be able to come." "Arjun, please, Mrs. Volkov," he corrected gently, stepping inside, the warmth of the house immediately enveloping him. "My uncle said it was an emergency. The water heater?" "Yes," she confirmed, her voice trembling slightly, the fragile composure threatening to crumble. "It just completely died. No hot water at all. And it's getting terribly cold in here." She gestured vaguely towards the interior of the house, which, he now noticed, carried a distinct chill, a dampness that seeped into the very air. The faint, pleasant scent of cinnamon and old paper was almost entirely overwhelmed by a subtle metallic tang, a hint of stagnant water and cold pipes. He followed her through the house, past the dimly lit study with its overflowing bookshelves, past the elegant antique furniture. They descended a flight of stairs into the basement, a surprisingly neat and dry space, far from the damp, cluttered basements he usually encountered. The water heater, a massive, cylindrical behemoth, stood in a far corner, an ominous, silent presence in the dim light. "It's completely unresponsive," she stated, her voice tight with a mixture of frustration and despair. "I tried everything. The pilot light, the breakers. Nothing. It's just dead." Arjun knelt, his powerful flashlight beam sweeping over the unit's cold, metallic surface. He systematically checked the gas line, the electrical connections, the pressure relief valve. His uncle had been right. It was completely, unequivocally unresponsive. The faint hum of electricity was absent, the pilot light dark. "Looks like the heating element is completely shot, Mrs. Volkov, and probably the thermostat with it. This is an old unit, perhaps 20 years past its prime. It's beyond a simple repair, I'm afraid. This one needs to be replaced entirely." Her shoulders slumped, the slight hope that had flickered in her eyes extinguished. "So, no hot water tonight?" Her voice was barely audible, imbued with a deep, weary disappointment. "Not tonight," he said, his voice softer than he'd intended, a wave of sympathy washing over him. He stood up, turning to face her. The single bare bulb in the basement ceiling cast long, stark shadows, making her seem even more fragile, more vulnerable. "My uncle is tied up with a major commercial job, but he's already scheduled a full crew to be here first thing in the morning to replace it. They'll have you all set up by lunchtime, I promise." Her gaze met his, and in their hazel depths, he saw not just disappointment, but a profound weariness, a deep-seated exhaustion that went beyond a mere lack of hot water. "Tomorrow," she whispered, the word laced with a quiet despair. "I was truly hoping. I just really needed a hot shower tonight. It's been a very long day." Her voice trailed off, her eyes fixed on some distant inner landscape, as if recalling a burden, a personal battle he couldn't possibly fathom. He felt a sharp pang in his chest, a tightening sensation that surprised him with its intensity. He saw her not just as a client, but as a person, a woman carrying an unseen, crushing weight. The thought of her enduring a cold, uncomfortable night without the simple, everyday comfort of hot water gnawed at him. He knew his limitations, knew he couldn't magically conjure a new water heater out of thin air. But something in her expression, a raw, exposed vulnerability, compelled him to offer more than just a diagnosis. "Look, Izolda," he began, using her first name instinctively this time, the name feeling natural, familiar on his tongue. "I can't replace the whole unit tonight, not by myself. But I can thoroughly check for any obvious quick bypasses, or maybe even a small portable electric heater if you happen to have one. Just to warm a small space, enough for a quick sponge bath with boiled water to get you through until the morning crew arrives." Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, then a fragile spark of hope igniting within their depths. You would do that?" "Of course," he said firmly, pushing past his own hesitation, the unspoken boundaries of client-contractor dissolving in the face of her quiet distress. "It's the least I can do. No one should be without a basic comfort like hot water, especially when it's getting cold out." He went back to the silent water heater, systematically checking every component, every wire, every valve, even though he knew deep down it was likely futile. He opened up the electrical panel, the soft hum of his multimeter a lonely sound in the quiet basement as he tested circuits, meticulously tracing the flow of power. He worked in a focused silence, the only sounds the faint, ambient hum of the house and the occasional clink of his tools against metal. She sat on a makeshift stool he'd pulled over for her, watching him, her earlier distress slowly, almost imperceptibly, giving way to a quiet, tentative hope. He felt her gaze on his back, not as an intrusion, but as a warm, comforting presence, a silent affirmation. He found himself explaining each step of his futile examination, detailing the function of each part, even though he knew she probably didn't understand the technical jargon. He just needed to talk, to fill the silence, to acknowledge her presence, to bridge the growing chasm of formality between them. "It's truly beyond repair, then," she said eventually, a resigned sigh escaping her lips, a final acknowledgement of defeat. "Completely irreparable." He sighed too, straightening up, wiping his hands on a clean rag. "I'm afraid so, Izolda. It's just too old, too worn out. The internal components are completely fried. There's no quick fix, no patch for this one. It's a total replacement situation." He paused, looking at her, meeting her weary gaze. "I'm truly sorry." "It's Izolda, Arjun," she corrected him softly, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her voice, a gentle insistence that chipped away at the remaining formality. "Please, call me Izolda." His breath hitched. The intimacy of her using his first name again, coupled with her explicit request for him to use hers, felt like a silent, unspoken invitation, a delicate step across an invisible threshold. "Izolda," he repeated, the name feeling foreign and yet strangely, deeply right on his tongue. "I suppose I'll have to make do," she said, her voice tinged with a faint, almost imperceptible sadness, a quiet resignation. She rose from the stool, her movements slow, deliberate, as if each action required conscious effort. "Thank you for trying, Arjun. You really did go above and beyond." He watched her, a knot tightening in his stomach, a dull ache spreading through his chest. He hated seeing her so defeated, so utterly alone in her quiet despair. He thought about his own small, cluttered apartment, its perfectly functioning hot water heater a constant, unappreciated presence. The contrast felt jarring, unfair. "Izolda," he began again, the name now feeling completely natural, like a familiar melody. Do you have any friends or family nearby you could possibly stay with tonight? Just until the hot water is back on? It's going to be a cold night." She shook her head, a faint, rueful smile touching her lips, a ghost of her earlier composure returning. No, not really. My sister lives clear across the country in California, and my few close friends are all out of town on various trips. It's just me here, truly. Her gaze drifted around the basement, then back to him, a profound, almost aching loneliness reflected in their depths. Always has been, really, for a long, long time. The unspoken burden of her loneliness hung heavy in the air between them, a tangible weight that pressed down on him. He saw it then, truly saw it, beyond the polite facade, the quiet pain, the suppressed solitude she carried like an invisible shroud. It was a stark revelation, and it stirred something deep within him, a fiercely protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. He was just a plumber, a young man sent to fix a broken appliance. But in that moment, in the dim, cool light of her basement, he felt an overwhelming, undeniable desire to alleviate her discomfort, to offer something more, something real, something beyond a simple repair. There's a small portable electric heater in my van, he said, the words tumbling out before he could fully think them through, driven by an urgent impulse. It's not much, certainly not for the whole house, but it could warm a small bathroom, maybe enough for a quick sponge bath with boiled water from the kettle. And I have some extra clean blankets in my emergency kit if you'd like them. He winced inwardly. He was consciously crossing a line, offering more than professional service, stepping into a realm of personal care. But he couldn't help himself. He felt compelled. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, then something else, something akin to profound relief, transforming her features. You would truly do that, Arjun? Of course, he said, his voice firm, unwavering, pushing past the remaining tendrils of his own hesitation. It's the absolute least I can do. No one should have to endure a cold night without some basic comfort. He went up to his van, the cold night air a sharp contrast to the house's interior. He retrieved the small electric space heater and a couple of clean, neatly folded blankets from his comprehensive emergency kit. When he returned, she was waiting at the top of the basement stairs, a faint blush creeping up her neck, a delicate flush that hinted at a shy vulnerability beneath her mature composure. You don't have to, Arjun, she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper, as he approached. You've done more than enough already. I want to, Izolda, he replied, meeting her gaze directly, his own eyes holding an unwavering sincerity. He carried the compact heater into the nearest bathroom, a small, elegantly tiled space, cold and damp. He plugged it in, the quiet whir of its fan coming to life, pushing out a thin, tentative stream of warm air. He draped the blankets over a nearby armchair, hoping they would offer some small comfort. It'll take a little while to truly warm up, but it's certainly better than nothing at all. She stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, watching him, her expression unreadable, a complex tapestry of emotions swirling beneath the surface. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken thoughts, with the raw, emotional weight of the moment. Thank you, she said finally, her voice barely audible, a fragile thread in the quiet air. She took a tentative step into the bathroom, reaching out a hand to feel the tentative warmth emanating from the small heater. You're very kind, Arjun. He nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Every instinct told him to leave, to retreat to the safety of his professional role. His job was undeniably done, but he found his feet rooted to the spot, an invisible force holding him there. Izolda, he began again, his voice hesitant, raw with an unaccustomed honesty. Are you truly all right? Beyond the water heater, I mean. Is there something else? She looked at him then, her hazel eyes searching his, and in their depths he saw a vulnerability that stunned him, a raw, unfiltered pain that sent a tremor through his own being. Her mask of composure, usually so meticulously maintained, seemed to shatter in that moment. A single tear, bright and glistening, tracked a path down her cheek, illuminated by the dim bathroom light. No, Arjun, she whispered, her voice cracking, barely audible. I'm not. Not really. Not at all. She swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the cool, tiled floor, unable to meet his intense stare. It's just, some days, the sheer weight of everything, the crushing burden of it all, feels simply too heavy to bear. And then something small, something utterly mundane, like a broken water heater, just tips the scale, and everything comes rushing back. He felt an overwhelming, almost visceral urge to reach out to her, to offer comfort, to bridge the physical and emotional distance between them. But he held himself back, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, trembling slightly. He was too young, too inexperienced, too everything. She was a client, a woman nearly 20 years his senior, a person he barely knew, bound by the strictures of professional decorum. And yet, the raw, unvarnished honesty of her confession shattered all those carefully constructed boundaries. I understand, he said, his voice low, rough with emotion, a profound empathy blossoming within him. Sometimes things just pile up, one on top of the other, until it feels like you're drowning. She looked up, her eyes glistening, brimming with unshed tears. Yes, exactly. You understand. The silence that followed was different from before. It was no longer empty or awkward, but filled with a profound, shared understanding, a fragile, nascent connection that transcended the professional distance, transcended their ages. He felt a deep, almost overwhelming sense of responsibility towards her, a burning desire to alleviate her burden, however small, however temporary. I should go now, he said, the words feeling like a betrayal of the profound moment they were sharing, a retreat from something deeply important. She nodded slowly, but her gaze lingered on his, a silent plea in their depths. Yes, of course. You've done more than enough, Arjun, more than anyone could ask. He took a step towards the door, then another, his heart thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He was almost out of the bathroom, almost out of her orbit, when she spoke again, her voice soft, urgent, compelling. Arjun. He stopped, his hand on the doorframe, turning back slowly. She was standing in the doorway, illuminated by the dim hall light, her face still streaked with the lingering traces of tears, but her gaze was steady, piercing, holding him captive. Thank you, she said again, her voice a little stronger this time, imbued with a quiet intensity. For seeing me, for truly seeing me, for seeing beyond the facade. He didn't know what to say. What words could possibly encompass the swirling vortex of emotions within him? He just stood there, meeting her gaze, feeling the profound weight of her words, the almost unbearable intimacy of her gratitude, of her vulnerability. He felt exposed, stripped bare, yet strangely alive, more real than he had ever felt before. He wanted to tell her that she wasn't alone, that she didn't have to carry her burdens by herself, that he was there, truly there. But those words felt too big, too premature, too overwhelming for the fragile moment. He managed a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of her vulnerability, of his own burgeoning feelings, of the delicate, unspoken promise that hung in the air between them. Then he turned and walked out, his steps heavy, the quiet hum of the portable heater in the bathroom the only sound echoing behind him, a faint, comforting warmth against the growing chill of the night. He knew, with an absolute, undeniable certainty, that he couldn't simply leave her like this. Not tonight. What happens now? No one expected. But it's what restores fairness. The drive away from Peregrine Close felt like a retreat from a battlefield, though the only conflict had been internal, a silent war of hesitation against a powerful, unexpected pull. Arjun drove for mere minutes, the familiar, quiet streets of New Haven blurring past his windshield, but his mind remained firmly anchored in Izolda's quiet townhouse. He replayed her words, her expressions, the profound vulnerability in her tear-streaked eyes. The thought of her alone in that cold house, burdened by an unseen sorrow, gnawed at him, a relentless ache in his chest. He pulled over to the side of a deserted street, near a forgotten, overgrown park, the engine idling, the rhythmic tick of the indicator light on his dashboard mocking his stark indecision. He couldn't just leave. It went against every fiber of his being, against every instinct that had been stirred to life in that basement. He might be young, still finding his footing in the world, but he was not heartless. He was not merely a plumber sent to fix a broken appliance. He was a human being who had witnessed another's quiet, desperate suffering, and he found himself unable to turn away. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his hands tightening on the steering wheel until his knuckles were white. What was he even thinking? This was profoundly unprofessional, illogical, possibly even reckless. His uncle would undoubtedly lecture him, perhaps even reprimand him for such a blatant disregard of professional boundaries. But then his uncle had also told him, with a surprising softness, to be there for her. He made a decisive U-turn, the tires crunching softly on the gravel shoulder, and headed back towards Peregrine Close, his heart hammering against his ribs with a frantic, insistent rhythm. He didn't have a coherent plan, just an urgent, overwhelming, almost primal need to return, to offer some semblance of comfort, to simply be present. He pulled up to her house again, the portable heater's faint, comforting whir still faintly audible from the bathroom window he'd left ajar, a small beacon in the deepening night. He took another deep, fortifying breath, pushing down the surge of anxiety that threatened to overwhelm him, and walked back up the path, knocking gently but firmly on her front door. He waited, the silence of the street amplifying the thumping of his own pulse, the chill of the night air seeping through his work clothes. He wondered if she'd even answer, if she'd be annoyed by his return, confused by his presence. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two, the porch light flickered on, casting a warm, inviting glow, and the door slowly, tentatively opened. Izolda stood there, looking at him with wide, questioning eyes that still held a lingering sadness. The tears seemed to have dried, but her face still possessed that fragile, exposed quality, as if she had shed a layer of protection. She clutched the knitted cardigan tighter around herself, her fingers digging into the soft wool. "Arjun?" she asked, her voice a soft, disbelieving whisper, laced with surprise, perhaps even a hint of fear. Did you forget something?" He shook his head, pushing his hands into his pockets, trying to appear nonchalant, in control, even as his insides churned with a nervous energy. "No, Izolda. I didn't forget anything. I was just driving and I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about everything, about how you were feeling." He paused, searching for the right words, for a way to articulate the complicated swirl of emotions, the undeniable empathy that had compelled his return. I couldn't leave you alone tonight, Izolda. Not when you're going through a tough time and the house is cold. It just didn't feel right." He watched her face for any sign of rejection, any flicker of annoyance, but saw only a deepening understanding. Her gaze softened, a profound, almost heartbreaking recognition dawning in her hazel eyes. He saw the initial flicker of surprise, then something akin to gratitude, as if she finally understood the depth of his concern, the sheer earnestness of his intention. A faint, delicate blush crept up her neck, a telltale flush that betrayed her maturity, hinting at a hidden shyness. "Arjun," she began, her voice barely audible, a fragile whisper that carried immense weight. "You really don't have to. I'll be perfectly fine. I'm accustomed to it." But her words lacked conviction, and her eyes once again seemed to plead, silently, desperately, for him to stay. "No," he said firmly, taking a resolute step closer, closing the small gap between them. "I don't want to leave you like this. Not tonight. I know it's unorthodox. and it's probably not what you expect. He searched her eyes, letting his own sincerity shine through. But I could just stay here, on the couch if you want, just until the morning, just so you're not alone. I'm not asking for anything, Izolda, just to be present, to be here. He felt the profound vulnerability in his own voice, the raw, unadorned honesty of his plea. It was a terrifying admission, laying himself bare, but he found he couldn't hold it back. It had to be said. She looked at him, truly looked at him, her hazel eyes searching his face with an intense, almost painful scrutiny, weighing his sincerity, his intentions. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions, with unspoken fears, with the undeniable forbidden pull that hummed in the air. He saw the profound struggle in her eyes, the internal conflict raging within her, the age gap, the impropriety, the unspoken rules that governed their interaction, the societal expectations she undoubtedly carried. But he also saw, just beneath the surface, the profound loneliness, the yearning for connection, the quiet desperation that warred with her carefully constructed composure. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a long, shaky sigh escaped her lips, a deep, shuddering breath that seemed to release some of the suffocating tension in her shoulders. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, a fragile, trembling curve that held both a hint of pain and a dawning hope. "Come in, Arjun," she said, her voice soft, warm, and imbued with a fragile, almost hesitant acceptance. She stepped aside, opening the door wider, inviting him into the sanctuary of her home, into the intimate space of her vulnerability. He walked into the hallway, the familiar, comforting scent of cinnamon and old paper enveloping him. But this time, it felt profoundly different. It felt like home, even though it wasn't his. She closed the door gently behind him, the soft click echoing the sudden, tangible shift in the atmosphere. The formality that had clung to them like a cloak seemed to dissipate, replaced by a delicate, almost palpable intimacy. "You don't have to stay on the couch, Arjun," she said, her voice a little stronger now, a newfound resolve entering her tone. "There's a small guest room. It's not much, but it's warm, and it has a comfortable bed." He nodded, a wave of profound relief washing over him, loosening the knots in his stomach. "Whatever you're comfortable with, Izolda." Truly. She led him to a small, elegantly appointed guest room at the end of the hall. It was cozy, simply furnished but immaculate, with a single, neatly made bed and a small window overlooking a quiet, manicured garden, now bathed in moonlight. "I have some clean sheets in the linen closet," she offered, her movements still a little hesitant, as if unsure of how to navigate this unexpected intimacy. "Don't worry about it, Izolda," he said, stopping her, a gentle hand on her arm, a fleeting, tender touch. "Honestly, I just need a place to sit. I'll be fine. A blanket will do." He sat gently on the edge of the bed, feeling the soft give of the mattress, the comfortable weight of the quilt. She stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself again, but this time, it seemed more for comfort than for protection. "Are you truly sure, Arjun? You've already done so much. You've gone so far out of your way." "I'm sure," he said, his gaze fixed on hers, unwavering. He wanted to tell her more, to explain the profound impact she'd had on him, the way her quiet vulnerability had resonated with something deep inside him, awakening emotions he hadn't known existed. But the words eluded him, too big, too complex for simple articulation. Instead, he simply offered her a small, reassuring smile, a silent promise. She nodded slowly, a faint, delicate blush returning to her cheeks, a touch of pink against her pale skin. "All right then." She hesitated for a moment longer, her eyes searching his, then took a tentative, almost imperceptible step into the room, as if testing the waters of this new intimacy. Would you like some tea? Or perhaps something simple to eat?" I could make us some warm soup if you're hungry." "Tea would be wonderful, thank you, Izolda," he said, grateful for the normalcy of the offer, for the simple act of shared ritual. No need for food, really, just tea. She went to the kitchen and he heard the familiar clinking of ceramic, the gentle murmur of water coming to a boil. He sat on the bed, listening to the comforting sounds, feeling the quiet warmth of the room slowly enveloping him, seeping into his very bones. He knew he was taking an enormous risk, pushing the boundaries, crossing lines that were usually inviolable, but he found he couldn't regret it. He felt a profound, undeniable sense of rightness in being there, in simply being present for her, in her time of quiet need. She returned a few minutes later with 2 mugs of steaming tea, the comforting aroma of Earl Grey filling the small room, mingling with the lingering scent of cinnamon. She handed him a mug, her fingers brushing his, and this time, the touch lingered for a fraction of a second longer, a silent acknowledgement of the delicate bridge they were building between them, a fragile thread spun from empathy and unspoken longing. She sat on a small antique armchair across from him, cradling her mug, sipping her tea, the silence between them no longer awkward or strained, but comfortable, companionable, imbued with a profound sense of shared space. He felt the tension slowly drain from his shoulders, replaced by a quiet contentment, a sense of belonging he hadn't anticipated. "Thank you for coming back, Arjun," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes fixed on her teacup, as if unable to meet his gaze directly. It truly means more than you could possibly know." "You shouldn't have to go through things alone, Izolda," he replied, his voice soft, earnest, imbued with a quiet conviction. "No one should. Not ever." She looked up then, her gaze meeting his, and in her eyes he saw a glimmer of hope, a fragile spark of something new, something luminous. "No," she agreed, her voice thick with emotion, a single tear escaping to track a path down her cheek. "They shouldn't. But sometimes you forget that." They sat in comfortable, profound silence for a while longer, sipping their tea, the warmth of the mugs seeping into their hands, mirroring the warmth that was slowly spreading between them, a quiet fire igniting in the depths of their shared vulnerability. He felt a profound shift, a deepening of the connection that had begun with a leaky faucet and culminated in a broken water heater. It was an unspoken understanding, a shared vulnerability that transcended their ages, their social statuses, their very circumstances. He saw in her quiet presence the subtle hints of her resilience, her quiet strength, her deep capacity for feeling, all hidden beneath the veneer of her sorrow. And she, he sensed, saw something in him beyond the young plumber, something deeper, more compassionate, more capable of understanding than he usually allowed the world to see. Eventually, the late hour began to press, the quiet hum of the night outside, a gentle reminder of the approaching dawn. The soft glow of the table lamp cast long, intimate shadows across the room, creating a cocoon of light and warmth. He felt a profound reluctance to break the fragile spell, to acknowledge the inevitability of the coming morning, of the world outside this quiet sanctuary. I should let you get some rest, Izolda," he said, his voice a little hoarse, a quiet sigh escaping his lips. He set his empty mug down gently on the bedside table, the clink a surprisingly loud punctuation mark in the silence. She nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on him, a lingering intensity in her eyes. "Yes, of course." She rose from the armchair, her movements slow, deliberate, almost balletic. She walked towards him, stopping just a foot away, her presence filling the small space, a silent magnetic force. He could feel the warmth radiating from her body, the faint, comforting scent of cinnamon and tea enveloping him. "Arjun," she said, her voice barely a whisper, a mere breath of sound, her hazel eyes searching his, probing, seeking. "You are a truly good man, a rare one." He felt a profound blush creep up his neck, a warmth spreading across his face, a raw vulnerability he hadn't anticipated. He didn't know how to respond, how to accept such a profound, deeply personal compliment from her. He was just a kid, still figuring things out, often clumsy and unsure of himself, prone to doubt. But in her eyes, in that moment, he saw a reflection of something he hadn't known was there, something pure and true. "You deserve better, Izolda," he blurted out, the words escaping before he could filter them, driven by an overwhelming conviction. He meant it with every fiber of his being. She deserved warmth, comfort, happiness, a life free from the quiet sorrow he'd glimpsed, from the profound loneliness that clung to her. She deserved someone who could offer her everything she needed, not just a temporary fix from a plumber, not just a fleeting moment of solace. Her gaze intensified, piercing him, seeing straight into his soul. A faint, knowing smile touched her lips, a subtle, almost imperceptible curve that held both a profound tenderness and a gentle, unmistakable challenge. She took another, decisive step closer, closing the remaining distance between them until he could feel the soft brush of her clothing against his. She reached out, her hand rising slowly, gracefully, her fingers gently cupping his cheek, her touch surprisingly firm yet infinitely soft, tender. His breath hitched in his throat, his heart thundering in his ears. "Then be it," she whispered, her voice a silken thread, barely audible, yet vibrating with an astonishing power, her hazel eyes locking onto his, holding him captive. "Be better, Arjun. For yourself, for me, for everything that can be." The world narrowed to just the two of them, suspended in that single profound moment. The soft, golden light of the lamp, the lingering scent of tea, the astonishing, tender pressure of her hand on his cheek. In that instant, everything changed. The unspoken became palpable, undeniable. The forbidden became an aching, irresistible pull. He saw not just a lonely woman, but a vibrant, resilient soul, capable of immense love and profound connection, waiting to be truly seen, truly cherished, truly loved. And she, he realized, saw something in him, a nascent strength, a deep compassion, a quiet goodness that he was only just beginning to discover within himself. The air between them hummed with possibility, with a quiet, powerful promise that transcended words. He didn't know what the future held, what complexities lay ahead, what challenges they would face. But in her eyes, in that moment, he saw a path, a fragile, trembling hope that he suddenly knew, with absolute certainty, he had to explore. He just stood there, meeting her unwavering gaze, his heart soaring and trembling all at once, as the first pale, ethereal light of dawn began to seep through the small guest room window, painting the world in hues of soft, ethereal promise.